Hey everyone, this is Nick and this is the StarLabs StarLite laptop. It's a very small 11.6-inch laptop with amazing build quality and it's pretty versatile, but I have a hard time finding where to slot that laptop in one of those neat pre-made categories. Because while it's affordable, it's not as affordable as a Pinebook Pro. It's extremely well built, but the performance is not equivalent to a modern Ultrabook. So I don't really know who is the exact target for this laptop. What I know is that it basically fulfills the same role as the older 12-inch MacBook from Apple or the 11-inch MacBook Air of old. Still, I think this is exactly why it's a very interesting device. So let's take a look at what it can do right after I tell you everything about our sponsor. Thanks to TuxCare for sponsoring this video. If you've ever worked on a project using PHP, you know how frustrating it is to know that the version you're using is going end of life and that you're gonna have to upgrade to it quickly with a bunch of refactoring and code rewrites. Well, TuxCare can now help you to plan that transition thanks to their PHP extended lifecycle support. With that new service, you can keep your existing codebase and still receive security updates and patches to PHP, even if it's no longer officially supported. This means that if your codebase still meets your operational requirements, it can also still meet your security requirements, and you get some more time to plan the transition. If you want to learn more about TuxCare's PHP extended lifecycle support, you can click on the link in the description below. Okay, first things first, let's start with the build quality. And here, StarLabs does not disappoint. What we have here is an 11-inch laptop with a full matte black anodized aluminium body, which is super rigid and strong and looks really good. StarLabs make their own chassis that they design themselves, and the StarLite is no exception, and it benefits from a really great build quality. It's also insanely thin at 1.36 millimeters in height, which is barely taller than an M2 MacBook Air. It's still pretty hefty for the size though, at almost a kilogram or 2 pounds. It's definitely not heavy, but for such a small device, it's not lightweight either. What it is though is insanely tiny and cute. Like seriously, a Steam Deck is wider than this device. And in terms of length, it's about the same as a modern big like Plus or Max phone. It has a very sturdy hinge that you can almost open with one finger, and that doesn't really wobble all that much. The branding on the device is pretty minimal, with a very understated StarLabs logo on the back and the text StarLite on the bezel of the screen, again barely visible depending on the ambient light. Now speaking of the bezels, they're really a weak point here. They are huge, both on the top and the bottom and on the sides, and that's really a shame. They host an 11.6 inches display, but they could easily have gone for 12.6 inches here. There's ample room, and the device would have looked a lot more modern. I really hope that's something they will consider in the future. Another small issue, the chassis is an absolute fingerprint magnet, and keeping it looking clean will require the use of the cleaning cloth included in the box. Even picking up the laptop will leave smudges, even with the cleanest of hands. There is no avoiding it. And this here is a huge missed opportunity to insert a D-brand sponsorship, except they do not sponsor me and they would probably be very mean and insulting to me, so it's probably for the best. And also they probably do not have a sticker for the StarLite 11-inch. I doubt it. Apart from that, the device looks really good and it feels really solid. It doesn't creak at all, there's minimal deck flex, it has a good heft to it, you can't really bend it, it just feels good, like a premium device and not a cheap plastic laptop. Of course, you can also open the StarLite, either by removing the little trapdoor with 2 screws to access the SSD, or by removing all of them to access all the internals, but the RAM cannot be replaced. StarLabs has a complete disassembly guide on their website, although it doesn't seem quite up to date with the latest model. And you won't void the warranty if you decide to upgrade or replace components. Oh, and you might also have noticed, there are no air intakes and there's a very small air exhaust along the lines of the hinge. But that's it. And that's because this device is fanless, it's passively cooled, and we'll come back to that. Now let's talk about what's inside this thing. The StarLite comes with one CPU option, an Intel Pentium N5030. This is a quad-core CPU with a base clock of 1.10 GHz, with turbo boost up to 3.10 GHz. So it's not a speed demon by any means, but we'll try and put it through its paces when we move on to benchmarks. The graphics part is the integrated Intel UHD 605, which is, again, not very powerful, but enough for the intended use of this laptop. The CPU is accompanied by 8GB of RAM. It's 2400 MHz DDR4, and you cannot select anything else when buying the device, and you also cannot upgrade it yourself. The RAM is soldered. It also embarks 240GB of SSD with options to go up to 480 or 960GB. And again, you can upgrade that yourself. It's more of a one-size-fits-all device with very limited choice, and that's also reflected in the keyboard layouts. You can only get it with a QWERTY English UK keyboard or a QWERTY American keyboard, and there are no other choices. So if you need something else, then this is absolutely not for you. In terms of I/O, you get a USB-C port that also does charging, you get a micro HDMI output, 2 full-size USB 3.0 ports, a DC jack for the included barrel charger, a headphone jack, and a micro SD card. Now this I/O is probably more than enough for a device that's really meant to be taken on the go anywhere, and it's not really a desktop replacement. With the micro HDMI and the USB-C, you can get up to 2 external displays, and they can go up to 4K, but only at 30 Hz. You also get Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, of course, with 802.11ac and Bluetooth 5.1. You can also choose between Ubuntu 22.04, Elementary OS 6.1, Linux Mint 20.3, Manjaro 21, MX Linux 21, or Zorin OS 16 as the pre-installed distro, whatever the edition for any of these distros, or you can buy it with Windows. Now, why would you inflict that on that poor little CPU? I have no idea, but the option is here if you want it. As with all StarLabs laptops, you get to choose the BIOS, either the American Megatrends one, so AMI, or Core Boot. And as with all StarLabs laptops, it comes in a wonderfully small and minimal box with a light blue sleeve, a power plug that can be all types, UK, EU, US, or Australian, and a USB-C to 3.5mm barrel charger cable, although you can opt to get a 5 meters long cable or a USB-C charging cable in 2 meters or 5 meters. Now, let's talk about the display. So, as I said, it's 11.6 inches and it's surrounded by huge bezels, which should absolutely have been reduced to fit a 12-inch screen here. It's 1080p, 16:9, it's matte, and it's covered by something that feels like glass, but definitely has an anti-glare coating. The viewing angles are really good, the colors feel nice and accurate, and it's bright enough at 300 nits. It supports 100% of sRGB and it has a color depth of 71% with a contrast ratio of 1000:1. It's a pretty good panel, honestly, it's good. So of course it's a very small panel, but 1080p on an 11-inch screen is way more than enough. Everything is super sharp, super focused, it's really good. And the display is nice, the color accuracy is good, it's a joy to use. So I'm glad they didn't skimp on that like most manufacturers do on their entry-level laptops. The top bezel hosts the 1080p webcam, which is serviceable, although it won't give you excellent performance in low light. But at least it has decent resolution and you won't be the worst looking person in a meeting. Although some might say that whatever the camera quality, I will always be the worst looking person in a meeting. The webcam is accompanied by a microphone that is bad. Sure, you won't hear any fan noise because it's fanless, but there's still some audible static in the background and it picks up key presses. If you type, you can hear it, and everyone also can. You will definitely want to use something else to do any kind of serious video conferencing. The onboard mic is just no, it's no. As per the speakers, they're surprisingly decent. They don't have much bass and the sound lacks definition, but they never saturated, even at max volume, and they didn't sound tinny or echoey at all. That's absolutely enough to watch any kind of YouTube video or even a Netflix show. It's good enough. Although for sure, any kind of headphones will give you a better sound quality than this. Now, a laptop is only as good as its inputs, and here StarLabs didn't disappoint. The keyboard is relatively small, of course, and certain keys don't have a standard size. but it also doesn't feel cramped. It's backlit with 2 levels of brightness, and it feels surprisingly good to type on. Key travel is nice, not too shallow. The keys aren't mushy at all, they actuate really well, they're stable, and you won't get any missed presses. And it also sounds pretty good. You get function keys that actually perform functions, which means that your print screen key is on F12 because you don't have a dedicated one, and you get a super key simply labeled Super, which I really like. I much prefer having just the Super label than a cartoony Tux logo like what most other Linux device manufacturers do. The touchpad is covered in glass and it's super smooth, although it does pick up fingerprints like crazy. Gestures feel really good on this thing and it's very precise, very nice to use. It's small, of course, but it also doesn't feel cramped, although you will probably want to enable touch to click as it's a diving board mechanism, and seeing that it's relatively short in height, you can only really click it efficiently in the 2 or 3 lower centimeters, which makes for a very small click zone. So, by now you probably have figured out that the CPU isn't a beast. And you're right. On Geekbench 5 it gets a single core score of 550 and a multi-core score of 1544, even compared to the old Ryzen 5 3550H that was in the Desk Mini UM350 that I reviewed previously. It just gets destroyed. For comparison, this old Ryzen got 967 and 3348 in single score and multi-core respectively, almost double in both test suites. So yeah, you're not doing any video editing or 3D rendering or any kind of intensive workload, especially since the device is fanless and won't sustain turbo boosting for long. So of course you'll also never hear a fan spin because the laptop is passively cooled, so in terms of noise it's really quiet. But it also means that the CPU will overheat very fast, and so it cannot turbo boost for long periods of time. It's just gonna give you a short burst of performance and then it's gonna have to throttle to cool down. It also won't play any kind of 4K content, at least not on YouTube. Turning hardware acceleration on in Firefox does make it almost work, but there are still stutters. At 1440p everything is smooth and works fine, and since you only have a 1080p screen here, unless you want to use that laptop plugged into a TV, there's no reason to play anything higher resolution than that. Day-to-day performance is pretty good though. You will rarely notice you're not using a more powerful CPU. Even with a lot of browser tabs open, with a video playing in the background, the device stayed reactive and it didn't stutter. And of course, your mileage may vary depending on your workload, but if it's mostly office-related stuff and web browsing and you have a few background processes, you basically have nothing to worry about. It's gonna be enough. If you have like really intense activity loads from, I don't know, any kind of performance-demanding app, then absolutely this CPU will let you down. And of course, gaming on that thing isn't really an option. Just opening Steam and installing a game taxes the poor little Pentium immensely. I tried Hades, which was basically unplayable with really bad frame rate, even with a lowered resolution. The integrated GPU is just not good enough and the CPU doesn't have a base clock high enough to make this work. I guess some old emulated titles might be okay and maybe some indie titles, but it's not really going to be pleasant. Now then again, it's not the purpose of this thing. And as per battery life, the fact that it's fanless means that it holds its own pretty well. It is stated for up to 8 hours, but for me, at mid-brightness on power saver mode, playing YouTube videos in loop over Wi-Fi, it lasted for 5 hours. With a more typical workload of web browsing, writing scripts, listening to music, and the occasional YouTube video, it lasted for 6.5 hours. On idle, it kinda sips power though. I left it for 2.5 days, closed with 93% battery when I closed it, and when I reopened it after 2.5 days, it was at 73%. So it really didn't lose all that much battery in this time, which is pretty good. But still, yeah, you're not getting all-day battery life, which is a shame for such a portable device. So this little laptop sells for 488 euros, VAT included. It's about 400 euros without taxes. And that puts it in a weird spot. The StarLite is a premium device, in the sense that it has very good build quality. It doesn't cheap out on the screen, on the keyboard, on the touchpad, or even on the I/O and the speakers. But it still is an underpowered laptop. The CPU just can't do much apart from a very office-focused workload and video conferencing. But on the other hand, it's super easy to carry around. And it's versatile enough to be used plugged into a larger monitor if you need that, and you also won't need to live the dongle life. Its I/O is good enough. But at that price point, you're starting to compare it with 13 or 15-inch laptops that are cheaper. They're gonna be cheap plastic, less well built, with less good I/O and less good keyboards and worse trackpads and worse displays, but they're gonna be in the same ballpark with more performance. And yes, they're gonna be a little bit heavier, but this laptop is already about 1 kilogram. So is it really that much of a difference to carry around 200 or 300 more grams with you with a cheap plastic laptop? Now, the StarLite is in that weird zone of being higher quality than the equivalent cheap Windows laptops you could find, but not being able to do as much. So it's not a device I can just recommend out of hand. If you really favor portability and you do not have any kind of long intensive workloads, then yes, this thing is perfect. It basically fulfills the same job as the 12-inch MacBook did from Apple or the 11-inch MacBook Air back in the day. But if portability isn't your absolute priority, then this is probably not the option for you. The fact that it only has 2 different QWERTY keyboard layouts will also probably limit its potential reach, and the battery life can't really hold up for a whole day, which is a shame for such a small portable laptop. I left a link to the StarLite webpage on StarLabs website if you want in the description. They didn't pay me any money for this video, I'm gonna have to send the laptop back, they are not sponsoring this, I don't get any money if you buy it, so it's your choice. If you think portability is super important to you, this is probably a very good choice. If you don't, then there probably are better options out there. So, thanks everyone for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment, and if you didn't, you can also dislike it and tell me why in the comments as well. And if you really enjoyed the channel and my videos, you can also, well, support me. You can click the super thanks button underneath the video, the PayPal link in the description, or you can become a Patreon supporter or a YouTube member. Both get access to a weekly Patreon cast and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover. Both links are in the description as well. So thanks everyone for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!